if we don't start to up-level our state of consciousness very quickly, if we don't start to incorporate magic. But if we just follow the linear timeline of predictive analytics and statistics, it does not look good. And I think that's why we as a species are opening up to more potent modalities like psychedelics, like sex practices, like meditation, like breathwork, because we know that we have to call on resources that we don't yet have the capacity to see if we are going to change the trajectory of the species.
Welcome to Into the Multiverse, a podcast brought to you by Supermush, where we believe that mushrooms can actually change the world, and that if humans mirrored the magic and wisdom of the fungi kingdom, we would have a far more joyous and connected planet. Each week, we'll be meeting with thought leaders and experts to extract the best insights and stories across everything from functional fungi, psychedelic medicine, and so much more. Thanks for listening. Step into the multiverse with us. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Into the Multiverse. This is a unique moment because I have just recorded in the same studio with my current guest, and now we're recording our episode in her studio. This is the first time we haven't recorded in our studio in Venice. I'm up here in Topanga right now, and I am so excited to have this conversation. I love Emily Fletcher so much, and I've had a variety of beautiful experiences with you. The way that I would like to intro you, the story that comes to mind, we were just talking about it. The first words that I ever heard you say in life, even though I had known of you, was we were up in Malibu at a friend's house, and we were all going around and sharing. I believe the prompt was something around a vision of a better world or something you wanted to call in and create in the world. And you proceeded to share this elaborate, beautiful vision of a stadium of people all in peak pleasure prayer. You might have different languaging to describe what you described then, but I was like, who is this woman? And then I discovered that I knew who you were, and we connected the dots, and we've had a beautiful ensemble of experiences since then. And I'm so grateful whenever I get to be in your presence because you're one of the most alive humans that I've ever met. And I strive to become more and more alive every day. And there's so much to say about you. You are an author. You are a meditation teacher. You are a mother. You're a coach. You're a mentor to so many people. You are so many things. You're most well known. People that are listening to this podcast will know you probably for Ziva meditation, but you work on so many things. You also have your own podcast, which I was just honored to be on. I have so many things I want to talk to you about, but thank you for coming on my show today.
I'm already crying. I don't know why I'm crying. I think it's just interesting to have a mirror back. You know, it's like life is actually quite long, and I've lived a lot of iterations. And just when you said I was a mother, I was like, oh, right. And I just miss my son so much. I haven't seen him in like 5 days, and it just already tears are flowing. I think that this is time for it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good podcast.
And we ate a lot of sex gummies before this, so you were really stimulated.
Yes, I am very stimulated.
A lot of super much sex gummies were consumed prior to this episode, but I was thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about on the way up. And I kind of, before I do my episodes, I like to, stalk people a little bit on the internet, even if I know them, just to see like little touches of what I wanted to talk about. But I would love to start with a little bit of background on your story, but in the lens of like big life moments where in these moments, pick out a few of your life where you were like, oh, I was a different person before this moment and after, like big wake up moments that has led to your consciousness being what it is now.
Ooh, big wake up moments where my consciousness shifted. I mean, as you were saying that, a story that came to mind is when I was 5 and I asked my mom, because I was raised Southern Baptist, and I was like, how do we know we're Baptist? Like, were we born Baptist? Did we choose it? And she let me go and check out other churches. I mean, there wasn't like a huge selection in Tallahassee, Florida, but I got to go to, a Jewish synagogue, and I got to go to Church of Latter-day Saints and go to a Catholic church. And so I think even at a very young age, I understood that God is a disco ball and that we're all looking at the same thing, but seeing very different fractals of it. And that felt like a changing moment. I think being in my first musical when I was in high school, we did Guys and Dolls when I was a freshman as our spring musical. And being on stage singing and dancing with so many people working towards this common creative goal felt like church to me. It felt like, oh, I've actually found my religion, and it is musical theater. I was that deep of a musical theater nerd. And that's when I decided that I wanted to be on Broadway, was like the high that I felt, the community that I felt from singing and dancing with people. And now that I understand like the roots of religion and where we have come from and how indigenous cultures have communed with God throughout the ages, like it makes so much more sense. Like it was religion. Like it was us finding God together, using our voices and our bodies in unison and in harmony. And then I would say having my son. And not actually the moment of birth. I know some people are like, oh my God, the moment I met my son, moment I met my child, like that was a little scary and he looked like an alien and I was like, had an epidural and I didn't have the like cocktail of oxytocin God chemicals that everyone says. And so I was like, ah. And I also hadn't slept I had a 4.5-day labor. So, you know, it was intense, but then becoming a mother, like in that process postpartum, like it's the biggest change your brain can go through, matrescence, other than adolescence. So that certainly changed me. And then I would say my divorce. I'd say my divorce is probably the biggest initiation and portal. Are these the sex gummies? I'm crying.
They
again.
work in mysterious ways.
Yeah, it was the biggest initiation and portal of my life. And it opened up, and I think it really was a death portal. Like so many parts of me had to die in that transition that it made space for like so many new parts to come alive. And so, yeah, like 3 weeks after I asked for the divorce, I met my now best friend. I met my now cosmic love. I moved in with my current roommate. And like all of these people have been very big initiators in my life, very big teachers, and have really helped to birth this new version of Emily Fletcher into the world. And then I would say, you know, and then another one, and this will maybe be the last one I mention, is learning to meditate. Like I was truly suffering from debilitating anxiety and insomnia and premature aging. And the day that I learned to meditate, like I slept through the night for the first time in 18 months. I was in a different state of consciousness that I had ever been in before immediately. And I liked it. And like almost immediately I was like, I know I'm going to dedicate my life to giving this key to other people.
Wow. There's probably 100 moments like that you could have named. I'm really glad that you chose those. These big life moments that you just described, I feel often are where people stop, where you go through these normal phases of life, motherhood, marriage, and you've continued to like break down all of these paradigms and then reinvent yourself. But while retaining all the lessons, I haven't known you for that many years. It's been a few years that I've been able to be in your presence, but you've been on such a beautiful journey and you have such an amazing mission. And you're also like living a very human life, dealing with all these, like we were just talking about, the ridiculousness of like the behind the scenes moments of all of the things that you deal with. And so my question for you is, with all of that you just said and all of these crazy like death portals and reawakenings, you also maintain this like amazing lightness of spirit and you're laughing. Like I've seen you like laugh and cry in the same sentence. And I think that's like the ultimate measure of success, where you're like, oh, I can find this deeply funny and deeply tragic all at the same time. But what is the key for you to have so much fun with your life?
Ah, wow. What a great question. I actually think that's why we're here. I was just being interviewed on a podcast the other day and she said, imagine you're on your deathbed and I really want you to go there. Like imagine, like feel it, see who's around you, and imagine that you're taking like one of your last breaths. And if you were leaving advice to someone, or if you were leaving advice to your son, like what would you say? Like what would you want to leave them with? And I thought about it and I really tried to be like deep and philosophical. And the thing that came out was have more fun. Which is so funny because like people who really know me like day to day and like my team and stuff, I don't think they would call me like the most fun person. Like I'm pretty intense and serious a lot of the time. And I definitely have like a CEO, New York City, East Coast like drive to me. Like I don't know that I live it day to day. Like fun is not my number one virtue, at least not consciously, but I do think it bubbles out like subconsciously. And I would say that like when I'm making my when I'm doing my decision-making matrix of like, what am I going to do tonight, or where am I going to go on this vacation, or how am I going to spend this time? Usually I'm optimizing for fun.
I like that you use the words optimizing because it's the ultimate question, right? Like I actually, when I have conversations with people, one of the most common things that I find myself saying, I don't know if I didn't invent this sentence, but I like to think about the concept of like, what are we optimizing for? Because if you are optimizing for the longest like physical years on this planet, you might take a different type of course, right? You might extreme biohacking, reverse aging, all the things. If you're optimizing for
never having a cocktail, never missing your bedtime.
Right. Which it's funny because that actually probably somewhat works in reverse, because if you are having the most fun, you do live the longest. Like there's a little nuance there, but you get the point of what I'm saying is, if you're optimizing for making the most money or having, the most presence with your family, like there's all these different things you can be optimizing for.
Yeah.
And it's always important to reflect that. So what would you say you're optimizing for right now in your life? If you had to pick a few things as you're making your decision, fun being one of them, but you're on this mission, which I want you to speak more into and like share what your mission is and like what you're currently spending your time and energy thinking about and birthing into the world. But what are you optimizing for?
Yeah, fun is definitely up there. Time with my son is up there, which is fun. Like the more time I have with my son, the more fun I have. Healing is really important to me, like both my own and I think therefore the collective. And I feel like I'm in a unique position now where it is actually true. Like I believe it to be true that as I evolve my consciousness, no one else is dependent on mine, but I have initiated so many people. I mean, I've taught by some estimations like over 50,000, but in some estimations over 300,000 people have learned to meditate like directly through me. And so there is something too, depending on which lineage you're subscribing to, that like the more I advance my state of consciousness, it doesn't mandate or dictate anyone else's, but it's like it paves the road. It like makes it easier for their consciousness to also expand. And so I like to, and maybe that's self-aggrandizing, but it also, I think like, even if it's not true, it's a win-win-win. Like because it's certainly cosmically true that as one person evolves, all of us evolve, as one person heals, all of us heal. So there is a universal truth to that with a capital T, but there's also perhaps some like lineage folklore that I like to subscribe to, even if it's narcissistic, that allows me to think that as I evolve my consciousness, I make it easier for the 350,000 people who I've initiated to help their path as well, to smooth out their path towards evolution as well. So healing, fun. Yeah, healing is both personal and global. So I'll share my mission. So Ziva's mission is to help people to get into coherence with themselves and each other so that we can solve the big challenges that we're facing as a species using medicine, meditation, and pleasure, and have a great time doing it. So the modalities that I'm super into right now are pleasure, medicine, and meditation. And why would we do those things? Like, why would we take drugs? Why would we do sex practices? Why do we meditate? I would argue that we do those things to get better at life. Okay, now you're better at life. Now what? Well, now we want to make it better for life. Capital L, life. Like we want to have as much fun as possible on the planet. And it's hard to have fun if the species is sick. It's hard to have fun if we're not living in accordance or in symbiosis with the planet. It's hard to have fun when you're like staring. I mean, this depends on the person, I guess. When you're like staring a death prognosis in the face. And right now, humanity is doing that. Like we have somewhere between 60 and 80 years left of arable soil left. Like 60 to 80 years left of making crops with the soil at its current state. I don't think people are understanding that. I mean, my son is 5. That means he's 65. And like, we have to either invent a new way to eat or like humans are donezo. And yet I'm having a great time, even though like we're all going to die, because we're all going to die anyway. And, I mean, planet's going to be fine. We have to stop saying save the planet. Planet will be fine. You know this better than anyone.
Mushrooms
I learned today,
will just decompose, return everything.
I learned from a very smart lady that the mushrooms will eat the death and the planet will be fine. But humans right now we are going to be extinct quickly. like in the next generation or two, if things don't change, if we don't start to up-level our state of consciousness very quickly, if we don't start to incorporate magic. But if we just follow the linear timeline of predictive analytics and statistics, it does not look good. And I think that's why we as a species are opening up to more potent modalities like psychedelics, like sex practices, like meditation, like breathwork, because we know that we have to call on resources that we don't yet have the capacity to see if we are going to change the trajectory of the species.
Hi guys, taking a brief second away from the show to tell you a little bit about our sponsor. Supermush is our brand inspired by the 60s and 70s that makes the most delicious and effective functional mushroom supplements. Our newest and best-selling products are Sex, Energy, and Sleep Gummies. They're sugar-free, they're delicious, and for listeners of this podcast, we have a special discount code for you. It's ITM15, and if you want to try our gummies, use ITM15 at checkout. You can find all these products at supermush.com. What do you think it looks like in a best case scenario based on everything that you've learned, and so much of what you've done is like build this entire community and movement and helps, I bet it's more than that downstream from the people that those people have taught how to meditate. So call it hundreds of thousands of people and then some that have learned how to become in coherence with themselves. What else do you feel we need to do in this next very critical period of time based on your vantage point in order to reverse and change course of what's happening?
I think about it a lot, and I donate a lot of money to organizations that I think are doing the best for the planet. And I'm very aware of what I don't know. And I really don't know if like the 3D solution is available right now at the current state of consciousness. And so what I'm doing is the thing that I know how to do is up-level, give people the tools to help them up-level their own state of consciousness as quickly as possible. Because I think from that, having access to more solutions, maybe potentially other species or other intelligence in the earth, that we will find the answers out of that. But here are the steps I think we can take to move us in the direction of that magic. One, getting more in touch with nature, like getting back in alignment with nature. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why Andrew Huberman is so popular right now. He's basically saying like, get up and get sun in your eyes. It's like, oh, the Egyptians were praying to Ra, the sun god. Oh, Surya Namaskar, sun salutations. Right, been doing that for 6,000 years. But he's like reminding us, like live in accordance with the sun, like go back to the rhythms of nature. And, your work, like getting people to start to dance with mushrooms and psychedelics, it changes the way that you remember yourself to be part of the whole. Meditation, right? The foundational concept from the Vedas, which is the style of meditation that I teach, is that there's only one thing and we're all it. And that one thing is consciousness. So anything that allows us to have a visceral experience of that unity, I think is a step in the right direction and will be the thing that reveals to us what we need to do. I also think that simple things like taking our food waste and composting it, right? Like mushrooms are composting vehicles. Like if we compost our food, it's returning it to the earth. I just learned from you today that like what we do with death of like formaldehyding our bodies and then freezing them and then putting them in boxes and disallowing the earth from recomposting our bodies, we keep interrupting the natural laws of nature, the natural cycles of nature. So I think the more we can start to get back in touch with those, I think that feels like it. And obviously many different indigenous cultures have been doing this and mastering this for tens of thousands of years. So I think it's like really making space for and learning from those cultures, the ones that we haven't decimated so far.
So much of what your work is helping people go through the process of getting back in coherence with themselves so that they can contribute to these problems that the world is facing. And it starts with the individual. We know this, right? This is what so much of, this entire space is about. What it comes back to is once we, clear up our own shit, we can get out of bed in the morning and go contribute our highest gifts to the world. But the reality is we're so locked in our own minds. We're in a crazy mental health crisis. People are turning to meditation often not as a first resort, as a last resort, because nothing else has worked. And we're in this high state of anxiety and all of this, right? And we just had this conversation, and you mentioned in these 3 or 4 pillars of Ziva is medicine. Can you remind me the 4?
Medicine. It's just 3. So medicine, meditation, and pleasure.
And pleasure. I'd love to talk about those 3 and kind of like dive into those. Meditation, you've probably recorded maybe 100 podcasts about that.
So I know this a long time.
Look, she's been in the game for a while, ladies and gentlemen. She's been in it for a while. And you've made an incredible mark on that world. And it feels like now so much of what you're currently talking about and thinking about, like that foundation has been laid. You have that as a tool that's equal a part of these other tools. But I'd love to talk about the medicine and the sex and the pleasure element of things. And specifically, we'll start with the medicine. Our podcast is mostly about psychedelics and mental health and showing people how to use these tools to unlock their own minds. For your personal journey, when did psychedelic medicine first come into your world? How old were you? When did you start learning about it? And then we'll kind of like take that into how it appears in your world now and how you're using psychedelics.
Well, I think I'd like to start with just really naming the through line between medicine, meditation, and pleasure. And interestingly, I think that they are all ways for us to practice dying. I think, and in so doing, in practicing dying, you're able to connect with the thing that is bigger than you, because what dies when we die? It's really just the identity and the body. So if you can do that while you are alive, then as Brian Maruscu says, you never really die. If we die while we're alive, then we never really die. And so if you look at, mushrooms, ayahuasca, many psychedelic journeys, ego death occurs. You look at orgasm or pleasure. In French, it's le petit mort, right? It's the little death, so it's practicing dying. And meditation, what are you doing? You're transcending the left brain and accessing the right. You're transcending individuality and accessing totality. So in each of them, you are practicing dying, and in so doing, turning up the dial on your own divinity. And that's really, like, if I had to say my mission statement in one sentence, it's helping people to turn up the dial on their divinity, remembering that they are God pretending to be human. And when we start to do that, we can bring the frequency of heaven to earth. And that increasingly feels like the role that I am meant to play. And because I've always been a bridge, and now as these like bliss states are starting to substantiate in my nervous system after 16 years of twice a day meditation and using all of these other tools, it just, my baseline is really high, because you get addicted to those chemicals like you do anything else. Like you do cocaine every day, you're going to need more cocaine in order to get the high. Well, the same thing is true of bliss chemicals. It's just an endogenous substance. So my body's been producing dopamine and serotonin every day, twice a day for 16 years. And I need more of that to feel it. So my receptors have to get bigger, and the production centers have to produce more in order for me to feel that bliss. So my baseline of bliss has gotten increasingly larger, which is what substantiates that state of consciousness throughout the day. So just want to set the through line for pleasure, meditation, and medicine of how they are the same and why it's all really about turning up the dial on our own divinity.
And specifically on the science side, for people that are curious, we talked about this, but the brain scans are very similar, right? Like if you look at the default mode network, the neural pathways that are connected, transcendental meditation, psychedelics, the childlike state of a child's brain. I'd actually be curious. I haven't seen brain scans of someone in orgasm, but
I imagine it'd be hard to do. But I'm sure it's possible.
I'm sure someone's doing it. If not, maybe there's a study that will be inspired by this conversation. If someone listening would love to see it, please send us the imaging. But those are very similar states that you're accessing. Why was medicine always a part, or was this like an added layer?
We've just recently added it into Ziva's mission. And it felt like a reclamation based on something that happened this summer. But I'll wind it back of my beginning my journey with medicine. I would say it was recreational, like most people. Like my first interactions with psychedelics or substances was recreational. So for me, it was in college. And I grew up we also discovered that we both went to Florida State University.
It's crazy.
Which at the time when I was there, it was the #1 party school in the country.
That's why I went there. Brief side note on that. I'm not joking. My sister and I'm from Missouri. I literally Googled #1 party school in America, and there was no other criteria. That was like the only vetting of colleges. And we looked at a few videos. I think we looked at a few YouTube videos. It was like Arizona and Florida State, and was like, this one looks like a way harder party school this is where I'm going.
It totally was. And also you're welcome, because I was there at the time
You set the stage.
that it was being named the #1 party school.
You are probably the reason that I went to Florida State.
I will fully narcissistically accept that honor.
It feels so right.
And it's not true. Like the parties that I threw with my best friend, Jessica, like we were known. Like, so here, this is a humbling story. So Jessica and I went on to go, we were both on Broadway. Between the two of us, we've done 24 Broadway shows, which is not a small feat. Okay, so like it's a kind of like legendary, the amount of Broadway shows we've done between the two of us. Wow. I go back to Florida State with an ex-boyfriend and we're talking to some of the kids there, like the students, and they're like, wait, you're Emily Fletcher's boyfriend? Oh my God, she and Jessica were the roller queens. Like we were known as the roller queens, not for our 24 Broadway shows, but for the parties that we threw where people took MDMA.
Oh my God. I wasn't sure where the end of the sentence was going. I was hoping that it was going to go there. I was thinking like roller skate parties.
No.
Like, wow.
Yeah, MDMA.
Wow.
Yeah. And so now, now looking back, it makes so much sense because I had the 80s dare and this is your brain on drugs. Like I had so much of that programming that drugs are bad, conditioning, that it felt quite hedonistic and quite lascivious. And there was certainly as much of me that wanted to do it and loved it. There was equal parts of me that judged it and thought that it was wrong or bad or something to hide and be ashamed of, even though even then, I could feel the holiness in it. I could feel the sanctity in it. I could feel the love in it. And right out of the gate, I knew that like, oh, the connections that are made on this medicine do not close. Which is different than alcohol. Like if you get drunk and make out with someone, you're like ashamed and embarrassed. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And you feel you regret it, which is so different than like the heart open connections that can happen on MDMA where it's like, oh, we are bonded for life. Like we are in this for life. And it's like those connections don't go away. That felt like the first palpable change. But I was even at an early stage. Now I look back and I was like, oh, I was making temple space. Like I was making ceremony space for these people. I was going back to my priestess nature. I just didn't know that. So cut to, I could give you a long and sort of tale of my drug history. But to be honest, at that time, it was so recreational and I didn't really fully understand how it could be a pathway to the divine, but it was a pathway to fun. Like for me, my rule with drugs has always been like, if the pros outweigh the cons, then have fun. And I think that's a good rule, right? Like with anything, if you're going to eat food, if you're going to have coffee, if you're going to buy clothes at Target or whatever, it's like if the pros outweigh the cons, and that includes for you and everyone else, then, and if it's in consent with everyone around you. But this summer, my best friend Layla and I went on a priestess pilgrimage to Greece, and we went to Eleusis and Delphi and Crete, specifically to these sacred sites where in ancient Egypt, high priestesses were serving plant medicine and doing fertility rituals. And so we would go to these sites and we took mushrooms in Eleusis, we took LSD in Crete in this 15,000-year-old goddess worship cave, where they've been worshiping the goddess for 15,000 years, since the Neolithic period. So things got like wild and pre-verbal. And we went to Delphi, which is where, you hear like the oracles of Delphi were there, and they were being prophets to generals and kings and advisors, and people would go there to receive wisdom and guidance from these women who were in altered states of consciousness based on the sulfur that was coming up from the crevices in this particular spot where the waters would merge underneath the ground in Greece. And so something about going there, having now like been initiated into many of these sacred sexuality practices, there was a reclamation that happened in me where I was like, oh, there is a piece of me that has been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. And to see a place where there had been infrastructure built to it, rather than like, oh, if you do this, you might get killed. If you do this, you might get shamed. If you do this, you might be shunned from society, which is how I think most people are interacting with their magic. And people who identify as witches, they're like hiding still a bit. I think that's going to be changing very, very quickly. It is changing, but it's going to start to happen on a bigger scale. So to be in Delphi, where there's a whole stadium built to this magic, to go to Eleusis, where there were giant temples built to this work, and specifically women serving medicine, that has then birthed much of what we know as Western civilization, democracy, theater. It felt empowering to me, and it felt like a reclamation to me, and it helped to rewrite my 22-year journey with psychedelics, to see one where every time, even the first time I went to Burning Man, which is in 2013, my camp was like, they would all be like taking substances, and I'd be like, wait, everyone come together, let's pray. And I would like have people like pray over their medicine. And I have this alter ego. Her name is Julie Cruz, director. And she really wants everyone to be taking the same things at the same time and the same dosage.
I have the same alter ego.
We want to, and everyone has to pray over it. We have to set our intentions. And again, I used to even judge Julie Cruz, director, as like a controlling piece of me. But now I was just recognizing that it was making sure that we didn't miss the opportunity, because if medicine is all about set and setting, then you don't want to miss if you're going to engage with the substance, you want to make sure that you're clear on why you're taking it, that you are communing with the molecules of the medicine, and that you are setting the container for yours and everyone's coherence and safety on the ride.
There's so many beautiful things about what you just said. I think what I feel I would like to know personally more about is, and first of all, the just brief side note on this is, the first time that most people interact with psychedelics, because of the way that we have trained ourselves to perceive them as a society, is recreational, and there's an element of shame with engaging them. The first time I tried mushrooms was also at Florida State, so maybe we have that in common, but I remember thinking, I wish that my brain could think like this and feel like this all the time without having to do mushrooms to do it, because I still thought that they fried my brain at that time, which obviously they do not. I feel like a much smarter, more connected person after my experience with mushrooms, using them consciously. But the point here is that everything you just pointed to, that reclamation, going in and seeing with your eyes, not reading about it, seeing the history of the reverence that was built around sexuality and psychedelics, and how we've like slowly gone so far away from that. We've literally, like, across the planet, we have the reverse. I would love to share more specifically about the history around sexuality, and anything you want to throw in there around psychedelics as well. We kind of danced around it. I think that's such a fascinating topic that a lot of people don't know about. I've learned from you just hearing, some of your teachings, and like being in certain classroom type settings with you. Classroom type settings. Interpret how you wish. Is the history behind women and how we've gotten far away from that. What feels most present to share around that? Because that's a topic we haven't talked about on our podcast.
Okay, let me just see. You're asking about specifically like sexuality and how it's been removed from society, or the role that women have played in psychedelics, or
maybe both. Specifically about sexuality in society and the history of it, and these temples, and like the reverence we had for sexuality around it. Used to be revered sex practices, pleasure practices, was used as healing, and it was the opposite of shame. Okay, yes, great. So similarly to the way that psychedelics have been stigmatized and sort of ostracized from our community or from our society, and thought that they are bad and dangerous, and that you're going to go to hell, and that they're going to make you stupid and dumb, like just like that shame and programming is very pervasive. I would say it's even more so around sex and sexuality, right? Like we are taught that these parts are private, which to some degree, yes, like there is a level of privacy that is natural and human to want to have privacy around your body and around sex acts. Like I get the naturalness of that. But we've layered on top of that an element of shame, to where people think that their desires are somehow a sin. That people think that the same entity of God that gave us this endogenous neurochemical cocktail of oxytocin and norepinephrine and adrenaline and dopamine and serotonin that happens at the moment of orgasm, that the same God that gave you that internal pharmacy would also not want you to use it. That would be a sin, and if you do that, you're going to hell. Like all of these hilarious ideas that we've been so deeply, deeply steeped in that we can't even see how deep our programming is. This has been very deliberate, and it's been happening for tens of thousands of years. And one of the things that helped me to open my eyes to this was reading the Magdalene manuscripts. So this is an amazing channeled text by Tom Kenyon. And my amazing partner, Adam, read them to me as I would fall asleep for 10 months. He would read them to me as I would go to sleep. So it was like almost like the transmission went into my cells. But the Cliff's Notes is
that Mary Magdalene, who is largely seen as a whore, like that's how we interpret her in the West, that she was a whore, that Jesus was helping, that actually there's a wildly different tale, is that she was an anointed high priestess, and she was a disciple of an initiate of Isis, who is the Egyptian goddess of sex and magic and fertility and motherhood and sex magic.
I have right here, Isis.
Yeah, I have an Isis oracle deck here, and I have a very deep relationship with Isis. First time I've ever truly like anthropomorphized God and felt like I have a personal relationship with the divine the way I do with her. And so Mary Magdalene was like a high priestess and initiate, and had been studying these tantric practices of basically cultivating your life force, cultivating the most creative energy on the planet, which is our sexual energy, and using it to create whatever it is that you like, but more life force in your body. And so the theory in this book is that, so Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, or Jesus, like fell in deep love. And that actually there was many years where there's no, in the Bible, you can't account for where Jesus is. And according to a few scholars and a few friends of ours, they were actually in India. And they were studying like these ancient tantric practices, these practices where you can cultivate and utilize your life force. And so the idea, the sort of allegory of Jesus dying and being rebirthed through the Magdalene manuscripts is that he was doing that based on the tools and techniques that Mary Magdalene had initiated him of how to cultivate his own life force. Wow. And to bring his body back into life. And you hear stories of this in India all the time of like aeritarians or breatharians or people who will bring their bodies into very, very still. Their metabolic rate is so slow that it seems like they're dead, and they can be in that state for weeks, and then they will come back to life. So there's wild things that we can do with our physiology using these ancient techniques and tools. And so what I loved about the Magdalene manuscripts is that it took this character, because our parables matter, right? Like the archetypes matter, because we cannot be something if we cannot see something. And so this character that we've been taught as a whore was actually like a very powerful disciple and initiate of Isis, who then was a teacher and a partner to Jesus. And together, the Magdalene consciousness and the Magdalene transmission, along with the Christ consciousness and Christ transmission, it was this duality of the masculine and feminine that was so potent and so transformational on the planet. Because here we are 2,000 years later, and regardless of what you believe, or regardless of what exactly happened, something changed in the alchemy of those two humans. And people are still talking about it. So it turns out that the Gnostic Gospels, which are the Gospels that were removed from the Bible, one of them was Mary Magdalene's. So Mary Magdalene, she was a disciple. There's a whole, and when you think about it, every other gospel of the Bible, man. It's all men. And it's not even the original translation of the Aramaic. It's an interpretation of the King James Bible, which most of us are looking at, which was possibly similar people who were known as Shakespeare. So what we have to understand is that this is a human interpretation of an allegory. And what's happened is that we have forcibly removed the feminine version of this story. And a half-truth is a lie. And we have forcibly removed at least half of the truth from this sacred tale. And in so doing, we have seen the repercussions of that. We have seen how we have been a bird flying with one wing, how our society is out of balance because we do not know how to access that masculine and feminine inside of ourselves. And this is not about male and female. This is not about the future being female. This is about integration. This is about wholeness. This is about us activating and finding the real Holy Grail, which is inside of us. And that happens through unioning ourselves. That happens through knowing how to hold ourselves with our own masculine and flow with that life force of feminine inside of ourselves. And then from that place of wholeness and completion, we can union with someone else. That is when sex becomes sacred. That is when sex becomes a portal to God. And that is when you can really start to activate healing powers inside of yourself and someone else, because you are playing with the actual magic that can create a human, which is the most divine thing that humans have access to. I'll pause there.
Oh my God. Okay. What do you think would change about the planet if you had just a live stream where millions of people just heard the last 5 minutes of what you just said? Truly, like what do you think? Like first of all, the way you articulated that was so beautiful and impactful for me. And these are things that I believe to be so resonant and so true. As you're explaining this, I like paralleling so many elements of my own life and how that feels true in my own masculine and feminine, and so much personal resonance. But just from like a history rewrite and just telling a bigger version of the truth. What would change about the planet if we were to all know or be exposed to that information as another perspective, whether or not you find it to be true or not?
Yeah, great question. I think that we're hungry for it, actually. Like, I think we can feel the incompleteness of the reality that we're living in right now. We can feel the imbalance, and we can see like, oh, right, we're depleting the soils. Oh, right, we're facing mass extinction of species on the planet. Oh, our food doesn't taste as good as it used to because the soil is depleted. Oh, there's no snow in New York City anymore, and there might never be again. Like, we can feel the imbalance. And so the way that Lynn Twist talks about this, which Lynn Twist has been known as a living saint, she was been called in by indigenous populations through their dreams because anyway, Lynn Twist is an amazing teacher. I feel honored to call her a friend, but she talks about this bird with one wing analogy is hers.
That hit home for me in a big way.
But if you think about a bird that only knows how to use its right wing, right? And that's what we are right now. We're a species that has valued masculinity above all else, like patriarchy above all else. Let me acquire, let me make money, let me extract, let me accumulate, let me make structure, time, like all of these things we're really good at. Men and women, all genders. We're very good at the masculine. It's very developed. But our feminine of flow and receptivity and reciprocity and creativity and intuition, it's very underdeveloped. And so we're just flying in circles. And so I think if people understood that this is not about women taking over the planet, this is not, and because we're all so steeped in patriarchy, we think that matriarchy would be a reverse patriarchy because we don't even know what a matriarchy would look like. But if we actually look to history, which is where Layla and I went, we went to Crete, which is one of the only matriarchs known. I mean, there's been a few, but not many. But in Crete, it was equal power between men and women. Like, you would see equal representation under a matriarchy. You would see cultures putting resources into their children, into the food, into taking care of the elderly. And so it actually feels like more like this utopian society because we're actually valuing the things that make the quality of life better. And because we have this equal balance between structure and flow, which when you take gender out of it and start to look down at the subatomic particles of just how nature operates, there is inside of an atom, there is like the structure, which are like cubes on top of cubes on top of cubes, but then the light, the energy flows through that. So there's a masculine and feminine balance even at the atomic level. So if we are out of balance with that in the 3D reality, it is just going to create a less than fun reality. And so I think if people understood, if millions and millions of people could hear that transmission, my desire would be that they hear it not as a threat, not as that anyone is coming after anyone else's power, not that there even needs to be like reparations done for the millions of witches who have been murdered and all of the rape and all of the misogyny. And yes, all of that is real. But I don't even think that many people want like reparations for that. I think what we want is for all of us to rise into our greatness, all of us to rise into the incarnation and to the possibility that is encoded in our very DNA that we are not utilizing, which happens when each individual finds and balances their own masculine and feminine. But that is hard to do when all of the stories that you've been told feature a masculine story, when all of the stories that you've been told are highlighting and celebrating only one side of the spectrum.
Wow. I'm letting that land for myself.
And to bring it back to your first question, I think that if more people had integration and unity between masculine and feminine inside of themselves, my guess is that this is where the solutions will come for how humans can both elongate and enjoy the time that we have left on this planet, because I think that in so doing, we will come into right relationship with the planet, because it's the feminine who says enough. We don't need any more animals this season. We have enough meat, enough. We don't need any more money. We have enough. And like it's this sickness, it's this mental health crisis that is making us overconsume. We were trying to consume our way to happiness, and we need the feminine to say enough.
One of the places that this so clearly shows up for people, like obviously you can take the masculine and the feminine and apply it to everything. One of the ways that it's like, I guess, more sexy to show up, where people talk about it more, where it feels more approachable, is within the inner dynamics of a relationship, whether it be, a male and female relationship. That part actually doesn't matter, but the energy of masculine and feminine energy and polarity within a relationship. And so much of what you're describing, this balance, this coherence, all of these beautiful words talking about like a harmonious planet that can heal itself and the people on it, come from humans that experience deep levels of psychological safety from being in beautiful relationships with other humans. And you so much of your work is about that, I feel, where if you are bringing yourself into balance, you can have better relationships with other people. And within like romantic dynamics, when those feel in coherence and the masculine and feminine is in flow on both sides, where like, if you're using the example of a female and a male, when the feminine partner has balance of both of those within herself, and then it's balance in the relationship, it creates this beautiful dynamic that can be extrapolated outward. For you, within like history of whether it be your romantic relationship, how have you gone about finding that flow? And what have you learned about what feels important?
I've learned that if you don't look at your wounding, and if you're not willing to face the bag of tricks that we've all inherited from our ancestors, that those patterns just will play out again and again and again. And this is just my story. But, I'm like one of the more privileged humans I know, with access to more tools than almost anyone I know. And I've done more work on myself than most people that I know. Not all, but a lot. I've been doing this stuff for like 20 years. And what I'm amazed at is like, no matter how much meditation, no matter how much therapy, no matter how many plant medicine journeys, that still like the lineage that I've inherited shows up and is showing up. And so like my big work to do right now is healing my father wound, healing my relationship with the masculine. Because in my particular family, like the women are the matriarchs. Like the women the women make the money, the women raise the kids, the women hold the household down. Like they just do it all. And then the men, if they're not abusive, then they are a burden. So I have nine, and my mom had 9 sisters and 1 brother, come from a very poor family, no running water. They had an outhouse. Alcoholic grandfather was murdered when my mother was 5. And so I have this gaggle of amazingly powerful women around me. And I watch them one by one in their own way, taking care, like sometimes physically and financially and emotionally taking care of their partners. And so I'm like, whoa, Emily, like you've really chosen a very thick lineage to be born into. And like, what an opportunity to get to heal, to get to be, Annie Lala calls it like the chain breakers. That like there are people in the lineages that choose to be the chain breakers. And I love this because this is your Burning Man name, Chains, because you're the breaker of chains.
I was like, is she going to remember that? For the part of this that for people listening, we talked about it on Emily's podcast that I was just lucky enough to be on. But Emily doulaed me into Burning Man, and it was the most remarkable experience. I wish everyone could just sign up for a waiting list. That. If you could scale, oh my God. I think if you could scale Emily dueling you into Burning Man with Adam, who's your partner, and amazing. It was epic. And the name that you gave me was
Chains, because you were the breaker of chains.
I physically tried to break my bike chain. I did.
And that was just like a funny story that you showed up. There was supposed to be a bike for you. It was locked. You couldn't find the code or the key. And so you're like getting like actual chain cutters.
I was like, I'm not missing the party. I'm not going to let this stop me.
What are we optimizing for? Fun.
We're optimizing for fun. The chain is in the way of that.
But this also feels very symbolic in this conversation that like the work that you're doing of giving people access to unlock their minds, it's like you are a breaker of chains. You're helping so many people to break their lineage. They're allowing them to expand their consciousness. So yeah, I am into this.
I love that example. And to go back to what we were talking about.
I don't know if I answered your question about masculine and feminine and relating.
I think we were getting there. There. I'd love to like continue to dive into it because what I've experienced, and maybe it's just how I'm curating my Instagram feed. It's more of a personal reflection, but it feels like we're in an overcorrection moment where the people that have experienced the heaviness of, overly over masculinity in certain areas, whether it be personally or in their careers. Like we're in this interesting time where we're experiencing what is an overcorrection, whether it be, feminism. There's all these different words people are using to describe this, but it would be a shame to overcorrect.
Yes. And so thank you. So this feels something, yes, I've thought about this a lot because I tend to attract very strong women, like, powerful 7-figure CEOs and matriarchs and movement leaders. I mean, I live with Regina Thomashower, AKA Mama Gina. Layla Martin is my best friend. I'm friends with Mickey and Rada. Like we've got these like powerhouse, like big energy women. And when I started looking across the board, and I'm not talking about these individuals, but just in my circle of women, almost all of them have pretty intense daddy trauma and daddy issues. And so it's like they go, and then it's like they then develop the masculine inside of themselves and become what they did not have. And then what I see happening collectively is all these very powerful women who are trying desperately to soften, who are trying desperately to surrender into their feminine, but they've created worlds around them where that becomes very challenging. And myself included. And so I do think you're right that there has been an overcorrection because like the feminine was so repressed. We couldn't have credit cards. We couldn't vote. We couldn't own homes. And we're talking like in my lifetime. I was born in 1979. Women could only start having credit cards like 2 or 3 years before I was born. And so it's hard for us to imagine that now, but it's like, it's not subtle, like the amount of misogyny and repression that has happened. And again, it's not about. And then what we did is like, oh, well, to be in power, I need to be more masculine. I need to wear the shoulder pads and I need to make more money and I need to get more power. But that's not actually where we want to move. Like if we actually want to integrate, that's an internal job first. So where is my healthy masculine? Where is my healthy feminine? And what I've been doing as of late is really examining like what are the light and shadow aspects of my father? What are the light and shadow aspects of my mother? And then looking at that inside of me. And then looking at their marriage. What are the light and shadow aspects of their marriage? And how is that showing up? Because we all have that. Like all of our parents were human. Well, might be arguable, but most of our parents were human.
You might have a few alien parents out there.
I think there's somewhere in my lineage.
If I want to do a 23andMe, and Emily's going to get some calls from the Pleiadians.
They're coming in.
Your Pleiadian cousins start knocking on your door, and they're like, "I just got a DNA test, and it looks like we are twice removed."
I look forward to it. I welcome my Pleiadian cousins. But most of us have human mom and dad. And if they were human, that means they likely had light and shadow. It means there was great things about them and fucked up things about them. And for me, I wanted to just claim the light. I was like, oh, I have this about my mom and this about my dad. And I just wanted to accentuate and see all of their amazing attributes of myself. And my work as of late has been really facing the shadow sides of them and looking at where that is showing up inside of me. And I think if we all just spend a little bit more time there and see where the enemy is within, then we stop pointing and trying to find it without. I stop getting in that like fight or flight, that blame game, which I'm great at, by the way. I'm great at blaming. Judging.
If you believe, which the book we referenced on your podcast, Celestine Prophecy, all points to the idea that we chose our parents to awaken our trauma so that we can deal with them in this lifetime if we so choose. And it's an interesting reframe of I was huge for me when I was looking at my relationship with my parents and the things that I resented or didn't appreciate, and realize that I I very much believe I chose them to awaken those things in me so that I could work on them, because they're the only people that trigger it, because no one else sees that shit, and it's like the Ram Dass quote of, you feel enlightened and we can talk about all these amazing concepts, but the reality is, like, in the inner work of like deep personal relationships, where so much of this is forged in the fire, like the masculine and the feminine, like the rebalancing of this it's very difficult work, like the healing of a lot of these things. It's so deeply ingrained for generations and generations. We were talking about the science that's coming out to show DNA that passes down these things. So the things that we do now will be passed down to our children, whether we like it or not.
And the good news there is that at least, like, I think it's 95% of our DNA is mutable. Like 95% of it is our epigenetics. And so just put that in context. And this might have updated, but one of the guys that worked on CRISPR, one of the guys who decoded the human genome, he was at Summit when I was there a long, long time ago. And the way he described it is, if you think about the human genome as a 100-page book, the first 95 pages of that book are epigenetics, which are malleable, they're changeable. It's only 5 pages that are fixed.
Yeah.
So that is really encouraging to me, because it doesn't matter if your mom was an alcoholic and your grandma was an alcoholic and your great grandma was an alcoholic. Yes, that blueprint is there and it is strong. Okay, there's 5% of you where that blueprint has been written. But 95 pages of that book you get to rewrite with every time you meditate, every time you do psychedelics, every time you do therapy, every time you have sex, every time you get your feet in the earth, every time you get sunshine in your eyes, every time you eat vegetables, you are actually rewriting that genetic code. So I just don't want people to think that it's fixed, right? Because it's not. And it doesn't mean that the blueprint's not real. It is. And if you just let it go by the wayside, if you got a blueprint for addiction and trauma and sexual abuse, yes, it will play out. And that's the thing I'm facing. Like, oh, this blueprint that I've been given is heavy. It's big. It's strong. And I'm going to have to do a lot of work. I mean, 95 pages of a book is a lot of work to rewrite that book. So both things are true.
One of my first forays into like the self-improvement world, the statistic that I heard that blew my mind open was, I used to tell people I had a bad memory when I was, 20. And it's because I couldn't remember anyone's name, because I didn't make the effort to remember their name. And so that was like a story that I played in my head. And then I went to some conference where it was Dr. Daniel Amen, if you know him. And he gave some statistic that's something along the lines of like 66% of our brain is completely malleable. And I was like, oh shit, like only that is way more than the percent of me ever telling anyone that I had a bad memory. And it reworked my brain and my understanding around a lot of these things. And as I'm hearing you talk, so much of what I admire and what inspires me and what I want to take, as inspiration from you and other people that I see do this is a message of deep acknowledgement of the reality of the state of the world, and a message of deep optimism, because the reality is that we do have the tools and the modalities and all of everything that we could ever need to thrive. And I remember when I heard someone share this, and it really, really stuck home, like really hit home for me, because it's not 100% my world to like deeply study the environmental state of the planet, but I have brilliant people around me that kind of will share their knowledge. And it's encouraging. And from what I'm hearing of all the stuff you're saying, is like you have a deep understanding of the places that you've studied and looked, of what's happening in the state of our world and what we need, but also deep optimism, because if we change our consciousness, we can change all of these things. Yeah. And it feels like it's the intersection of all of this, which is what's so cool. Someone, a mutual friend of ours, Bear Kate, said this to me, and I loved it. And I've been saying it all the time, where he's like, we're all just pressing our acupuncture point across the planet. And it feels so encouraging, because everyone has their zone of genius where, in theory, if I like maybe studied for years and years, I could be like a student of yours and do the thing, but not, that's your zone of genius. Everyone is so uniquely qualified to do their work in their way.
Yeah.
And we all have a passion and a purpose. And so this acupuncture point theory was really encouraging. So if anyone's listening to this, it's like, just step so hard into whatever your zone of genius is, and the thing that lights you up, and figure out what you're optimizing for, and just do so much more of that. And it will press these acupuncture points.
I love that. And I also love the image of of that we're all here to sing our own song. Like we got to play like our instrument in the orchestra. Like we don't need 8 billion Allis. We don't need 8 billion Emilys. But what we need, like nature has actually made us in this fractal version of herself, right? That she wanted to see all these different versions of herself. And so it's like just playing your role to the best of your ability, that is actually what will delight nature the most. And that will be the thing that will unlock whatever the frequency is that will open up the magic that has the potential to shift things. And as far as the like simultaneity of like a pretty bleak prognosis for the species and deep optimism, actually, this has been crystallized by our friend Zach Bush, where he says that he gets so excited about the direness of the situation. He's like, yeah, there's only 60 or 80 years left of usable soil. We're facing the biggest mass extinction that we have in the history of the planet of species. And he's like, good, because it's going to take this much to wake people up. Humans don't wake up when it's just run-of-the-mill normal. We've been saying this stuff since the 70s, right? Like people have been hearing about this since the 70s. And it's going to take the alarm bell to wake people up. And so he actually gets excited when he sees the severity and intensity, because he knows that like once people wake up, which is, what is that? It's a change of consciousness. To go from asleep to awake is you up-leveling your consciousness or changing your consciousness. And that will be the thing that unlocks the tools that will allow us to move into and evolve into reciprocity and what I believe could be a real heaven on earth, like a real Atlantean utopian society, because hopefully we will have learned from the mistakes. And just yesterday, I had the great good fortune of getting to interview a channel on my podcast.
Just on a Thursday.
Just a casual
Thursday in the life of Emily Fletcher. I wish I could narrate your life, like just be kind of like behind the scenes Instagram. And now Emily's interviewing a channel on her podcast.
Honestly, like I'm going to start sending you texts, and maybe this will be like the new Sex in the City or something. But like my life is wild and amazing.
We were just discussing your like casual Friday night plan.
It's Friday day. That'll be during the day.
That's just the daytime. That's just lunch. That's lunch.
Where we're going to have vibroacoustic equipment with live DJs doing sound healing while on medicine in a coven of a witch place in Topanga. That's just a Friday afternoon in the world of Emily Fletcher.
That's lunch. It's lunchtime. What I'd love to to round this out with, and then kind of take into the closing of this podcast. I have learned so much on this. I'm so inspired. I honestly just want to capture so many things you've said and replay them to myself. And that segment around describing the history of sexuality is so important. So I want to double click on that part. And if you're listening to this, maybe go rewind to that part of the episode and listen to it again, and then come back to this point, and we'll start again from here.
Actually, as you're saying that, I do just want to like close that loop on the sexuality, is that I think that just like with psychedelics and with sacred sexuality, and even with meditation, like people thought like in the 70s and 80s, if you taught meditation, it was like a cult and it was weird and it was devil stuff. Like people were meant to feel afraid of it. But all of that is because these tools help us to turn up the dial on our own divinity. And what is divinity? It's you remembering how powerful and how creative you are. What is God? God the creator. The powerful God, the creator. But God is within us, right? Like there is only one thing, and we are it. And that one thing is consciousness. So as we become more conscious, as we turn up the dial on our own divinity, that is the thing that, yes, brings the frequency of heaven to earth, but it is also the thing that makes humans very hard to control. And so that is why we have had this systematic removal of the sacred feminine, of sacred sexuality, of plant medicines, of tools like meditation, because they give you a direct visceral experience of your own divinity instead of you having to outsource it through organizations. And so it really can be this collective reclamation if we choose.
If someone is listening to this and they're super inspired by your message and it's resonating, where would you recommend they start as a few things to look into, resources to point to that feels approachable, to kind of take this knowledge and dive into it further, but to start applying? I would like, to in those three areas: medicine, meditation, and sexuality and pleasure.
Yeah. So I am very biased, but I really, really believe that a daily meditation practice is going to make all of this so much easier. I think it makes the intention setting and the integration of psychedelics so much easier because you're creating that neuroplasticity every day. And I think it really sets you up for getting the most out of journeys, for not having such a rough ride in the journeys, and then for being able to implement the wisdom that you get afterwards. I also think that having a meditation practice can make your foray into sacred sexuality so much more gentle. Some people will say, like, you're not even allowed to practice Tantra until you've been meditating for 10 years. I think that's a little extreme. But I would say starting with a daily meditation practice. Now, I know that every hammer finds a nail, but there are types of meditation out there that do not have to be hard, where you don't have to sit for hours and hours, where you don't have to move to a cave and stop drinking and stop having sex. Like, there are householder practices, and that is what I have dedicated my whole life to. And that's what Ziva Online is, which was actually the world's first online meditation training, which interestingly, I got kicked out of my meditation community when I made it because they didn't want people putting stuff online. And but
no way.
Yeah, I had to make a decision. I was like, is my allegiance to this lineage or is my allegiance to helping people?
Whoa.
And this was back in 2012. And so I was like, my allegiance is to helping people. And so I didn't know if it was going to work. I didn't know that you could teach meditation online. And so I just like tried it out. And now we're at like, 50,000 people later who've been through it. And so, I mean, not to make a shameless plug, but the course is called Ziva Online. And I've basically taken like 15 years of this knowledge and put it into 15 minutes a day for 15 days. It's a training. It's a matriculation. Each day builds upon the previous day, and it teaches you mindfulness, meditation.
15 minutes a day for 15 days.
Yeah, the course is only 15 minutes a day for 15 days, and each day builds upon the previous day. So it's not just like an app where you go in and do a guided experience. This is a course. This is a training, so that by the time you graduate, you have these 3 ancient modalities to take with you for life, and you have a twice-a-day practice to take with you for life. And this is the thing. Like, if you were like, you can go to an island, what object could you take with you? Like, if I had to choose one of my very, very wide range of wellness tools, it would be this. It would be a daily meditation practice, because it is the thing that brings me home to myself every day. It is the thing that reminds me that I am God pretending to be human. It is the thing that allows me to get out of fight or flight and into stay and play. It is the thing that cured my insomnia on the first day after having insomnia for 18 years. 18 months. It is the thing that allowed me to not get sick for 8.5 years when I used to get sick all of the time. It is the thing that can reverse your body age by somewhere between 8 and 15 years. I'm about to be 45 years old and I feel like hotter than I've ever felt in my whole life.
I agree.
So like, truly, like, this practice is like, it is the key that we're all looking for. And what I found is that it can create the foundation to really make these more advanced practices, like deeper psychedelic journeys or sacred sexuality journeys. It can make them so much richer and so much easier, because you're not wrestling with so much of that lifetime of accumulated stress. And just to really explain a little bit of why Ziva is so unique, is that it is giving your body rest that is 5 times deeper than sleep. And when you give your body that rest, it knows how to heal itself. And the cool thing is that the body's not just healing the stress from today, it's healing all of that accumulated stress from your past. All that stuff that's been stored in our cellular memory comes up and out because you use the meditation to de-excite the nervous system. And when you de-excite something, you create order. And when you create order, all of that stress can come up and leave the building. And it's similar actually to what I'm assuming, and I don't know this, but just based on what people see when they are on mushrooms, like that sacred geometry, that fractal patterns of God, that language of God that shows up so repeatably in so many different people's consciousness, that order is very similar to what happens when you're in meditation and you de-excite something and you create order in your nervous system. So it's like these fractals of God, these like sacred geometric repeating patterns of God are everywhere all the time. But if we are stressed and if we are nervous and if we are sick, then actually the cellular structure in our body cannot resonate with all of the beauty and divinity that is around us. So this is a tool, a very accessible tool, 15 minutes a day for 15 days, that allows you to create that sacred geometry inside of yourself so that you become a tuning fork to attract that in your life.
Wow. I haven't heard you share the full explanation like that. And
I've never said that before.
It was beautiful. ZivaMeditation.com is where people can find it.
ZivaMeditation.com. And then I actually have a free masterclass. So if people want to dive deeper into the science of why this thing reduces stress, can help you overcome anxiety and help you improve your sleep, you can go to ZivaMeditation.com/podcast. And there's a free masterclass there. Also, for free resources, my podcast is called Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? And I've had this amazing guest named Alli who's going to be on it. But why isn't everyone doing this? And I'm bringing on guests to speak about the things that have allowed them to turn up the dial on their divinity and be like, wait, this is so good. Why isn't everyone doing it? So that's really fun. And I'm all over Instagram and all the places just at Ziva Meditation, which is ZIVA Meditation.
My 2 last questions for you.
Oh boy, here we go.
This has been so fun. I was just like, when I was on the way up here, I was like, oh my God, I got to listen to you speak for 4 hours. What a treat. This is such a treat. What are you the most excited about right now that has not been discussed? Things that you have not, shared, everything, all of your work, but something, it can be a work thing, but something that you're so excited about right now that just is making you stoked about the next 6 months, 12 months of your life.
Okay. One is this work. I know maybe this is where my existential kink of healing comes out, but I am actually really excited to see who I'm going to be on the other side of this work of healing my father wound and healing my relationship with the masculine. I don't know what it's going to look like, but my guess is it's going to be pretty amazing, like pretty inspiring and exciting. And like, if my life is this magical now, like I can't even imagine what magic is on the other side of me becoming more receptive and more surrendered and allowing nature to support me in its masculine glory.
Wow.
So that feels exciting. And also I feel excited about, it feels like the wellness community and the healing communities is becoming a bit of a mycelial network. I feel like our circles are getting deeper and tighter, and it feels like the right people are coming together to shine each other up and to support each other's missions. And so that feels exciting to me.
There's a lot of cross-pollination and overlap and synchronicity that is continuing to happen. Like, to talk about that like when you get that many people in a neuroplastic state that are doing all these things together, it's really beautiful. I am so excited to be in your world in any way. And for people to listen to this episode, it was so enlightening for me to listen to and inspiring. So I'm excited to go back and re-listen to it for myself, and for people to hear your message and everything you're working on and to engage with your work across all of the different fractals and ways that you can do so.
Oh,
please, there's more?
Yeah. Just that I would just like to say what sacred secret is, because I don't think we said that. We didn't really go into we talked like the history of pleasure.
Yes, we didn't talk about how it's manifesting your current work.
Yeah, but I just think just to give people like a quick snippet of what that might look like.
I think it would be disservice to humanity to not finish the podcast with that.
So there's really like 2 ways that people can work with me. One is to learn meditation, which is what I've been doing for 13 years. But the past 3 years I've sort of become a sex witch, and just casually. Which, what does that mean? It means that I'm helping people to use their endogenous pharmacology to create their dreams. So I'm just helping people to use the most creative force on the planet, which is their sexual energy, to manifest their dreams. So Sacred Secret is at its biggest a movement to help us remember that we are God pretending to be human. It's a movement to help us turn up the dial on our own divinity. At its simplest, it is a formula it's an embodied manifesting formula, right? Where we can embody our manifestations. And the formula is we visualize, alchemize, and magnetize. So I help people drop into meditation to visualize the thing they want to create. We alchemize anything standing in the way of that through somatic movement, somatic dance, somatic expression, and then we magnetize, which means that we start to build that creation energy in our bodies. We start to turn ourselves on. We turn on our magnets of the electromagnetic fields of our heads, our hearts, and our hoo-has. And then at the moment of peak pleasure, we dedicate all of that energy to the dream. And talk about magic. Like, the amount of magic that I have seen happen as a result of people using all of the tools and potential inside of our bodies to manifest and to magnetize has been wild. Like, people have healed physical conditions, people have healed relationships, people have made, just in this one container, someone manifested $600,000. Someone got a $100,000 grant for her company. Someone who was not a candidate for IVF suddenly got pregnant naturally. Like, it's been wild what has opened up from people reclaiming the power that has been taken from them through the shame and conditioning around their pleasure.
And my note on this is just for people to remember where it started and to know from what you shared, to remember where it started, think about the history of things, how they evolved, and to bring it full circle to the first question that I asked you of what were these big life, altering moments that you feel like defined your experience of life. And the first one you shared is that you questioned your experience of why your situation was the way it was with being with being religious, with what your current religious affiliation was. So question your situation. Ask yourself why you think the way that you do. I'm asking myself that for a few things that just came up as you were talking. Amazing. I wish I could talk to you for 2 more hours this podcast. We're going to wrap it up. We'll do another one. We're going to do another one. The last question, you already shared where people can find you. Everyone, please check out Emily Fletcher and her work. It has been so inspiring for me and so many people around me. And you are the same version of you on stage, off stage. I've gotten the pleasure to be a part of one of your experiences, doing one of these full activation pleasure prayers at a festival. Mutual friend of ours had a festival, and it was an extraordinary experience.
You're talking about Arcadia?
Yeah.
That was the first time I ever talked about that on a stage. And there was 2,000 people out there just like in full ecstatic
Yeah,
state.
it was a strong start.
That was a strong start.
Super strong start. The last question we ask everyone on this podcast is the most important lesson that you have learned from psychedelics.
Ooh. Oh, I know exactly. Okay, so Layla and I are in Eleusis. We did mushrooms in the Plutonian cave, which is like where...
Which is just a big sentence all in and of itself.
Which is where Persephone would go into the underworld. So like Demeter, the goddess, her daughter Persephone would go into the underworld, which is really representative, like going into the feminine, going into your internal landscape. And I had the experience of dying. And I saw the most fractal patterns, the most beautiful sacred geometry I'd ever seen. Layla and I were laying down for hours. And then I opened my eyes for the first time after hours. And I was just struck by how beautiful everything is. And the first thing I said, and this is going to sound like a very high thing to say, but I'm going to bring it back. The first thing I said was, it's amazing with your eyes closed. And it's amazing with your eyes open. Which, yes, very high thing to say. But here's the extrapolation, is that what if it's even better when we die? What if it's even better? What if we don't have anything to be afraid of?
I have no more words. That's such a beautiful place to end. Thank you for this conversation and everything that you're doing in the world. I'm so excited to witness all of your journey and to support in any way I can. So thank you for all the people you've supported and helped and guided. And you don't have a boring path ahead.
The one thing Emily Fletcher is not is boring.
You are not boring. I love you a lot. Thank you for coming on our podcast.
I'm so glad we get to do life together.
Love you. Thanks for diving into the multiverse with us. If you're interested in being a future guest on the show, sponsorship, partnership, or you're just mushroom curious, we're always looking to expand our mycelium network. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Into the Multiverse, where you can find clips from this podcast, psychedelic legalization news, events that we're doing, and so much more. We've also created our own in-house consumer lifestyle brand called Super Mush. We make mushroom mouth sprays. We make a whole line of mushroom streetwear. You can find it on Instagram at Supermush or online at supermush.com. We'll see you next week. Much love.